Hey everybody. Every summer I post my summer stack. At the beginning of every summer I post my summer stack, which is basically the stack of books that I hope to read over those next 2 to 3 months. The reality is that it never turns out that way because it takes twists and turns, and I find new books, et cetera, et cetera. So I thought that this year I would post all the books that I actually did read this summer. And just so that my students, my friends, fellow teachers can kind of get an idea of some of the stuff that I read, because I've got books that will appeal here to everybody. So the first book, I started the summer with this one, Tristan Strong Punches a Hole in the Sky. Now, this is not by Rick Riordan. It's by Kwame Mbalia, but Rick Riordan has curated a group of authors who are writing books similar to his Percy Jackson series. You'll remember that one drew on Greek mythology and was a huge success. So this particular book, Tristan Strong, draws on African American folklore, African mythology, to tell a story in a similar way. We've got this boy Tristan Strong who stumbles into a fantasy world where all of these characters that he's grown up reading about have actually come to life, and it's so that part of it's cool, but it's also a really good story. He has to save the world pretty much. So Tristan Strong Punches a Hole in the Sky is a really good start to my summer because it was fun. Next book I read, this was inspired by Project Lit, like several of the titles here. Just Mercy, and let's see, there we go, Just Mercy by Brian Stevenson. This is the original book. There is also a young reader's edition that is available that's probably for high school kids. But this book right here, really, this was my favorite read of the summer. This was one of the most powerful books I've ever read. It talks about a lot of the inherent injustices in our criminal system today, and a lot of that has to do with race. A huge part of that has to do with race. There's also a big chunk of the book talks about children who are tried and charged as adults, and kind of the tragedy of that. So Just Mercy. I know that there's a movie that's out, but read this book. So good. My Project Lit book club kept rolling through the summer, and we read this book right here, Ghost Boys. This was at the time we chose it. It was soon after it was soon after George Floyd was murdered, and so this seemed like a really good book. It kind of has to do with police violence against black boys, not necessarily men, but in this case black boys. And it's a really cool novel that's told in kind of parallel narratives. The young boy's name is Jerome, and in the opening pages, Jerome is mistakenly shot and killed by a white police officer, and kind of the story takes off from there. What's cool about it is we see both sides of the issue. We see what this is doing to Jerome's family, and then we also see what it's doing to the family of the police officer. And another really important part about this book is that one of the main figures, so it's called Ghost Boys because Jerome is living through the novel as a ghost, and he meets all of these other boys who are also victims of violence in the same way. One of the main boys that he speaks with is Emmett Till. Nowadays, not a lot of people know about Emmett Till. Everyone should know about Emmett Till. If your child reads this, they'll learn some important stuff. So this book is great for I would say 5th grade and up. As long as they're comfortable with that subject matter, 5th grade and up, no problems at all with this book. The next book I read was for a teacher discussion group at school. Again, in the wake of the protests that were happening end of May and into June, lots of school districts around the country wanted to kind of address this, and so there were book clubs that sprang up. And so the first book that we read was White Fragility. This was a really cool book. The subtitle tells you what you need to know: why it's so hard for white people to talk about racism. And we had a really great discussion. There's some challenging things in this book, but for adults who are trying to, who are struggling with the reality of what's going on in this world, this is a good place to start. White Fragility, Robin DiAngelo. Next book I read was All American Boys. This is a book that's been in my classroom for 2 or 3 years probably. One of my favorite authors, Jason Reynolds, and he paired with Brendan Keeley for this book. But man, this book was really, really good. And there's a theme to my books this summer. This book also had to do with police violence, and this was it was really good. This is a high school read, I would say, probably not middle school. I wouldn't mind if my kids read it, but there's some profanity. There is some reference to sexual situations. It's a serious book, but really, really good. Loved it. Jason Reynolds. Anything by Jason Reynolds you're going to love. The next book I read was this one, Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. I read this book a few years ago for the first time, actually, and I read it again to help some of my former students, high school students, were had some summer reading that was assigned, and this was one of the books. And so I read this so that I could kind of guide them through a discussion group. And The Invisible Man, what's great about this book is this is a book that was, that's more than 70 years old, and it was stunning to read this and see so much that applied today, unfortunately. But it was just a great piece of literature just by itself. But read within the context of the summer of 2020, there were whole new layers of meaning. Invisible Man. Next book I read. This was back to now my school, my staff book club. The next book we read was this one, How to Be an Antiracist by Ibram X. Kendi. And Dr. Kendi is, he's on the forefront of racial equity discussions and writings and research. And so, How to Be an Antiracist, it's very different from White Fragility, a different perspective. But I think I actually preferred this book. This book is kind of part memoir. He talks about his own journey towards, he accepts the fact that he's kind of a part of what's going on also, and that he has his own biases and prejudices that impact him. And so he kind of tells his own story and his own journey and how he changed his way of thinking, way of acting in a way to inspire others to do the same. How to Be an Antiracist is a really cool book. Our staff read it, or part of our staff read it, and we had some great discussions. All right, next book that I read, A Good Kind of Trouble by Lisa Moore Ramey. This was also for Project Lit. Students chose to read this one. A Good Kind of Trouble is clearly a reference to John Lewis, Congressman John Lewis, and we read that. My students in Project Lit, in the Project Lit book club, chose this book because they wanted to continue some of the discussions they had after reading Ghost Boys. And so this is about a girl who's starting middle school, and this, by the way, this is great for middle school and up. And it's about a girl who's starting middle school in the 7th grade, and she's kind of dealing with middle school drama just with her friends, kind of drifting in different ways, and not sure if her friend group is going to stay solid. But then there's also the reality of there's a trial that's lingering in the background. A white officer has killed a black man, and they're waiting on this trial to hear what happens. And so it's about how she kind of has to deal with. Her name is Shayla, and Shayla has to deal with this reality of how it's affecting her community, how it's affecting her friendships, and how it's affecting herself. So this was a really good book. The kids loved it. Next book, this was for my high school reading group that I was leading. The next book was Ceremony by Leslie Marmon Silko, and this is a book that I've been hearing about for a long time because a lot of my former students had read it as they moved on to high school, and I had never read it myself. So I was excited to get the chance to read it this summer. And it was, it's a lot of times it's said that it's the best novel, the best Native American novel written. It was written in the 1970s, but just a really cool book. It takes a while to kind of grasp. It's definitely for high school and above. There's some serious issues in here. Some mature issues are discussed in here. But it was really good. If you have to pick this up one day, if it's on your summer reading list, don't be afraid. It's going to be really confusing because it's not told in chronological order, but it's like a puzzle that you're putting together. And when you get to the end, you see that whole picture laid out on the table, and it's totally worth it. This is a really cool book. Now, the last book, and I'm almost done, so I'm kind of cheating, but my daughter and I have been reading this one, Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. I've read the whole series. I read them as they were coming out, and I loved them as they were coming out. And but I have not since. So it's been, I guess, probably this one here probably came out, I don't know, 17, 18 years ago, something like that. So it's almost like reading a new book. I know where things are going, but you know, the subplots and stuff like that feel like they're new to me. And so, and this is a beautiful book. If you have not picked up these illustrated versions, they're absolutely gorgeous. And sadly, this is the fourth one. The fifth one is not coming out till later this year. But this is my last book of the summer. I hope to finish reading it in the next day or two. We are super close to finishing. So that's it. There's my actual summer stack for the summer of 2020. Pick one of those books and let me know what you think. Bye-bye.